Maybe he did and maybe he didn't. Trump's take on the Saudi Crown Prince's role in Jamal Khashoggi's murder. The US president signals no sanctions on Riyadh. Too many billions of dollars of business at risk. America first or justice last? This is Inside Story. Standing with Saudi Arabia, the title of Donald Trump's statement says it all. The US president admits Mohammed bin Salman may have known about the plan to murder journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The CIA says the Crown Prince actually ordered it, but Trump's contradicted his intelligence agency, saying that's not a definitive determination. And in any case, he says it would be foolish to take action against Riyadh. That would threaten lucrative weapons deals, he says, and push up the price of oil. Very simple, said Trump. It's America first. But it might not be that simple. All eyes are now on the US Congress to see what it will do. I'll join our guests in just a moment after this report from Shia Britanzi in Washington.
I hereby grant you a full pardon.
The White House Thanksgiving tradition of the president pardoning a turkey took on a grim significance this year. A short time earlier, Donald Trump had made it clear he was giving the Saudi Crown Prince a pass in the killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. In an 8-paragraph statement filled with the rhetorical flourishes, the exclamation marks and slogans characteristic of the president's tweets, Donald Trump made his argument. King Salman and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman vigorously deny any knowledge of the planning and execution of the murder of Mr. Khashoggi. Our intelligence agencies continue to assess all information, but it could very well be that the Crown Prince had knowledge of this tragic event. Maybe he did, and maybe he didn't. Our relationship is with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Donald Trump went on. They have been a great ally in our very important fight against Iran. The United States intends to remain a steadfast partner of Saudi Arabia to ensure the interests of our country, Israel, and all other partners in the region. Very simply, it is called America First.
Basically, he was saying that our relationship as Saudi Arabia is so important, it really doesn't matter.
Later in the day, Mr. Trump was asked about his staunch support for the Saudis.
We're not going to give up hundreds of billions of dollars in orders and let Russia, China, and everybody else have them. It's all about, for me, very simple. It's America first.
After talks with Mike Pompeo in Washington, the Turkish foreign minister also discussed the complexity of his nation's relations with Saudi Arabia, making it clear that Ankara did not want to sabotage those links, but he added this.
We know well that the team who came to Istanbul did not come because they wanted to, but they came at the request of somebody. We know, though, that this person is not the king.
There was a withering response from the Washington Post, whom Khashoggi wrote for, and journalists' rights groups. President Trump is correct in saying the world is a very dangerous place, the Washington Post said in a statement. His surrender to the state-ordered murder will only make it more so. An innocent man, brutally slain, deserves better, as does the cause of truth and justice and human rights. In this failure of leadership from President Trump, it now falls to Congress to stand up for America's true values and lasting interests. The Committee to Protect Journalists tweeted this. If you boil the White House statement down to its essence, President Trump has just asserted that if you do enough business with the U.S., you're free to murder journalists. That's an appalling message to send to Saudi Arabia and the world. But it seems that the Trump administration has made a decision not to be concerned by the ridicule and disbelief that has greeted its arguments and ultimate position on the Khashoggi killing. Shia Britanzi, Al-Jazeera, Washington.
OK, well, let's bring in our guests now. And joining us here in Doha, Mohamad Elmasry, Associate Professor of Journalism at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. In Washington, D.C., Sigurd Neubauer, Middle East analyst and columnist. And in London, Cinzia Bianco, Senior Analyst and Researcher at Gulf State Analytics. A very warm welcome to all of you. Sigurd, first of all, your reaction. What do you make of Donald Trump's statement, which very clearly has come directly from the president himself?
Well, what we are seeing is that President Trump is consistent in his Trumpian rhetoric, and he promotes the America First agenda. His rhetoric should be understood within the context of the American mode at the moment. And the American mode, whether it is in the media or in the foreign policy establishment or within the Congress, is that business as usual between the United States and Saudi Arabia cannot continue. And this path that we have been on now for the past 2 years will no longer be tolerated. So President Trump was essentially trying to provide rhetorical support for salvaging what is left of the U.S.-Saudi relationship, because the Congress is now moving forward with imposing sanctions on the Saudi government, including potentially on Prince Mohammed himself.
But do you think it's strange that Trump doesn't fully absolve Mohammed bin Salman of involvement in this murder when he says it could very well be that the Crown Prince had knowledge of this tragic event? I mean, he's still very much sitting on the fence, isn't he?
I think that he is deliberately seeking to be ambiguous about it, because on one hand, his intelligence services, namely the CIA, has concluded that this murder was ordered by the highest levels of the Saudi government. On the other hand, the entire U.S. foreign policy establishment understands that the 80-year-old strategic alliance with Saudi Arabia must continue, even though Saudi Arabia has now committed this gruesome murder. So what President Trump is essentially trying to do is to balance these two things with his Trumpian style and his classic rhetoric, which is off-putting to a lot of people, obviously, but it salvages what is left of the U.S.-Saudi relationship.
Mohammed, do you think Obama would have reacted any differently? Do you think Trump is essentially taking the same line that any American president would when it comes to Saudi Arabia?
Well, it's an interesting question. The U.S. has a long history that predates Donald Trump and Barack Obama of sort of sidelining human rights issues, human rights concerns for larger American strategic interests. At times, the U.S. government has ignored human rights violations, and at other times, the United States government has carried out human rights atrocities of their own, all in the name of strategic interests. I think the difference here is that President Obama was refined, he was polished, and he was very subtle, all the while sort of paying homage to human rights rhetoric and principles, whereas Donald Trump is obviously very unrefined, he's not very polished, he's very sort of explicit and aggressive in his tone, and that is what I think many people, including many Americans and people inside the U.S. Congress, find sort of offensive and unbecoming of the office of the presidency.
Right. We'll get back to what the U.S. Establishment will do in just a moment. First of all, Cinzia, I want to bring you in at this point and just get an idea, perhaps from you, as to how the Saudi Crown Prince is feeling about this statement from Donald Trump, because, as I said, it doesn't absolve him of involvement in this murder, but, of course, it keeps business as usual policy alive and well.
Absolutely. And for Mohammed bin Salman, I mean, that's one of the best outcomes possible because, of course, President Trump could not completely disregard the conclusions of the CIA. So he chose to do something different, which is throw in some plausible deniability. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But basically, I don't care that much whether he did. Even though he may have been responsible, we will continue doing business as usual. So I think that's a very welcome statement from Mohammed bin Salman.
And so you think that he's going to be feeling quite happy at the moment with the reaction that we've seen so far from Washington?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's the best that he could have opted for. Of course, again, President Trump could not completely disregard all the information and the CIA's assessment. But at the same time, this plausible deniability is everything that Mohammed bin Salman needed to sort of put into question even the assessment of the CIA.
OK. Sigurd, Donald Trump left the door open for Congress to make the next move. The Washington Post has said it now falls to Congress to stand up for what it calls America's true values. So are we now going to see Congress taking further action?
We have already seen that the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Bob Corker, a Republican from Tennessee, and his counterpart from the Democratic Party, Bob Menendez, have now requested that the Senate should pass a legislation that would require President Trump to come forth on whether or not Mohammed bin Salman was responsible for ordering this execution. So that's the first step. The second step that is coming is that because the CIA assessment will be used as the linchpin, if you will, for the Congress to determine who was responsible for this killing, this will help lawmakers provide a sanctions regimes on the Saudi leadership and potentially on the prince himself. All of that could essentially cripple the Saudi economy, as it will be illegal for American businesses to invest in the Saudi economy. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is that what we have seen from the Russia investigation after Russia interfered in the U.S. presidential elections is that even though President Trump provided rhetorical coverage for his relationship with Putin, President Putin of Russia, the U.S. legislation and sanctions imposed has essentially crippled the U.S.-Russia relationship. And I think that we can move in a similar direction now with the U.S.-Saudi relationship. So this is extraordinarily serious. And therefore, I think that despite all the rhetorical hubris coming from President Trump, the relationship could only get worse from this point on.
OK. Mohamad, how far, though, do you think these moves by Congress are going to go? What is actually going to be achieved? If we look at the investigation into Mohammed bin Salman's culpability, I mean, how would that work? And then we look at sanctions on the Saudi leadership. I mean, Donald Trump's already made it very clear that the arms sales are a red line that will not be crossed. You know, we will not lose any of the money coming from Saudi Arabia from that. So what room has Congress actually got to maneuver here?
Congress can apply pressure. I think we should also remember that pressure from Congress influenced President Trump already to impose sanctions on 17 members of the Saudi the Saudi government. They were mid-level officials and already in jail for the most part, so that they were sort of meaningless sanctions. But it's an example of the kind of pressure that Congress can impose. And as the other guest said, they're now asking Trump to provide a response on Mohammed bin Salman's involvement within the next, I believe it's 120 days, or 120 days from October 10th, is I believe the date. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that the Congress can propose legislation that would prevent arms sales to Saudi Arabia, and there is something called a veto-proof majority. I'm not an expert on the American legal system, but I believe it's a two-thirds majority in both chambers. So if both the House and the Senate can come up with these supermajorities, then it might not matter what Donald Trump wants or thinks.
So again, I can see you nodding there. This veto-proof majority, is that something that we're likely to see enacted?
Absolutely, because what we have seen is that leading up to the Khashoggi killing, we have seen that the Congress was moving in the direction of limiting U.S. support for the war in Yemen. And now with the Khashoggi killing becoming a domestic political football, which is drawing outrage not just from the media and the political establishment, but also from ordinary citizens. This is something that the American Congress cannot let go by. So it is expected that this will easily be passed by both houses in the Congress.
OK, Cynthia, where can and where will the U.S. likely hit Saudi where it hurts?
I mean, here it's very important that we try to differentiate between the authorities and the competences of the different U.S. institutions. So, for instance, those authorities like the Pentagon have already taken some steps which are significant. As we know, they have decided to stop refueling Saudi jets hitting in Yemen, and that's absolutely crucial for if you have a look at military capabilities in Saudi Arabia and how fundamental that Pentagon support was. So that's that's very significant. At the same time, the State Department has similar room for maneuver, but I'm a bit more doubtful that actually measures that are truly meaningful in the sense that could be also perceived as damaging to quote-unquote strategic interests could be passed in the Congress, especially because they require a two-thirds majority. And, that's why I was referring to the fact that the statement that came out of the White House was very well received in Riyadh, because the statement also said that Trump is willing to consider other positions from congressmen, but there is a caveat. It says, if they don't hurt America and American interests, in his own words, or something like that.
Yes, so Mohamad, that brings us back to the original point. If they're not going to hurt the trade deals between Saudi and the US, what can the US do to really punish Saudi Arabia if it wants to?
Well, it depends on who you're talking about inside the U.S. I mean, right now, what we have to keep in mind is that the U.S. government is very polarized, and not just between Republicans and Democrats, but there's very much a division in terms of the relationship with Saudi Arabia and the Khashoggi affair. So, Donald Trump is trying to go on, business as usual. He wants to sweep all this under the rug. He's hoping that statement will do the trick. Meanwhile, you have these representatives and senators who are very troubled by what's happening. And I think that we're still in the very early stages of a prolonged kind of power struggle. And I think it's going to intensify once the Democrats take formal control of the House of Representatives in a couple of months.
OK, so no sort of clear path as yet from within America. Cynthia, what pressure can forces outside America, particularly perhaps the EU, other countries, bring to bear on the US to do more?
I think the crucial issue here is foreign direct investment. So 3 words. Saudi Arabia desperately needs foreign direct investment if it wants any chance of Vision 2030 succeeding. And we know that Mohammed bin Salman is very popular, but his popularity also depends on his ability to carry the country forward in terms of the main structural weaknesses in socioeconomic terms, such as youth unemployment. Youth unemployment and job creation is, of course, intimately related to foreign direct investment. And this is actually, it's not particularly political per se, but this is actually the most important issue right now on Mohammed bin Salman's desk, how to attract this kind of investment. And this kind of investment tends to be long-term. Therefore, investors are particularly concerned on political risk when they make these choices, and it's increasingly clear that they are. So I think that this is the most important card to be played, to understand, to convey the message that these kind of policies, and it's not only related to Khashoggi, also to the war in Yemen and to the initiatives against Qatar. So aggressive foreign policies choices are a problem for investors because they increase political risk. So this is, I think, the most significant card left to play.
OK. Sigurd, we've got news that Mohammed bin Salman, Saudi Crown Prince, will be attending the G20 summit in Argentina towards the end of next week. That's going to be quite an interesting event to watch, isn't it?
Certainly, and there's been some rumors that he will even meet with President Trump. That remains to be seen, of course. But President Erdogan of Turkey will be there as well. So it's important to remember that this crisis is a trilateral crisis, if you will. It's primarily between President Erdogan and Mohammed bin Salman, with President Trump really playing an outside role, because what we have seen so far is that the Turks have not let up on their pressure of leaking these damaging details pertaining to the murder and details pertaining to the operations leading up to the murder. So it is important to recognize that any sort of solution to this crisis lies in Ankara, and it is unclear as of yet how the Saudis and the Turks can negotiate between themselves now that all the details about this murder is out in the open. And therefore, I would caution that President Trump is really more or less a sideshow, because what he essentially did yesterday through his statement was to give space to the Saudi royal family to deal internally on how they want to proceed with this matter. Now that they know that sanctions are coming, the Saudi royal family need to discuss whether or not Mohammed bin Salman will remain Crown Prince, or maybe whether he will be removed from succession, and the United States and Turkey do not have any influence on that internal dynamic. So,
well, let's just pick up on that point about Turkey for a moment, because I'm glad you've brought Turkey into it. You say that all the details are out in the open. Mohammed, is that the case, or do you think Turkey has any more evidence that definitively links the Saudi Crown Prince to this murder?
Well, the Turks have been very strategic. They've been systematically leaking information, kind of this drip manner over the last several weeks. And there have been a couple times where I've thought to myself that, you know, maybe that's it, and then they've leaked more information. So I wouldn't at this point be surprised if they have additional information, that they've just kind of been biding their time, waiting for Trump to release this statement and to even maybe see how things are playing out inside the U.S. Congress. But I think that it does appear clear at this point that, you know, a lot of people were waiting for the body to be found, but it appears clear that the body is never going to be found, because it was, reports suggest it was dissolved in acid after it was dismembered. So from that standpoint, I don't know that we're going to get any additional. I don't know that we're going to get anything that explicitly and definitively links the crime to Mohammed bin Salman, in the sense that, you know, there's, you know, some sort of DNA evidence or some sort of, you know, smoking gun, some sort of a statement from a Saudi official that says Mohammed bin Salman, you know, ordered this. But with the evidence that we already have, that certainly appears to be the case. And we'll have to just wait and see over the next few days and maybe a few weeks to see if the Turks have additional evidence implicating Mohammed bin Salman.
Cinzia, do you think that the Saudis have been surprised by the strength of the global reaction to Khashoggi's murder? And given that the reaction to the war on Yemen is somewhat muted by comparison, do you think they were caught initially off guard and surprised to still find it pressuring the kingdom?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially within, you know, the decision makers circle, there was a lot of surprise at the backlash caused by this episode, especially, as you said, because not only other policy choices and the victims of the Yemen war, but also other slightly similar cases of arrests of dissidents and other journalists were basically left unnoticed. So it was quite a surprise. And also with the general public in Saudi, they were surprised that there was this reaction.
Just lastly, Sigurd, I just want to get an idea from you, as you think the US will ever change its stance towards Saudi, no matter what it does?
Yeah, I think it has, and I think that if you look at King Salman's speech before the Shura Council the day before yesterday, you saw that there were some indications that Saudi Arabia is returning to quote-unquote normalcy, and one of those indications is the call for peace talks with Yemen's Houthi rebels, the recognition of Palestinian affairs and Saudi Arabia's traditional support for the Palestinian cause. And even what I'm hearing in Washington and through my own networks is that the upcoming GCC summit in Riyadh, which will take place on December 9th, that all the leaders of the GCC countries will be there. So in other words, we're expecting that the GCC row will come to an end. And I think that these are part of the kind of concessions that President Trump has extracted from the Saudi leadership in his behind-the-scenes diplomatic dealings.
Okay. Fascinating discussion. Once again, many thanks for joining us, all our guests today, Mohamad Elmasry, Sigurd Neubauer and Cinzia Bianco. And thank you too very much for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website. That's aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Laura Kyle, and the whole team here, it's bye for now.